For the Democratic perspective on the court nomination process, we want to go now to New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who joins us from his home in Newark. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'm hoping you can hear me okay. As we laid out earlier, Justice Ginsburg's dying wish was that it would be the next president who would nominate her successor. As you heard from your Republican colleague, they're charging ahead with this process despite that. Is there anything Democrats can do to stop the nomination?
Well, first of all, I can only imagine that Justice Ginsburg understood that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court at a time that other institutions in our democracy have been losing legitimacy, have been under attack. I think she believed that the legitimacy of the court was so profoundly important. And this is one of those moments with so much at stake, from civil rights to voting rights to healthcare in and of itself. These decisions that the Supreme Court makes, it's important that they not only have the force of law, but the force of the legitimacy of everyone. So for Republicans to move forward like this, I think really undermines that. And again, the Senate's controlled by Mitch McConnell. He'll have a tremendous amount of control now. And so I'm not sure exactly how this will play out. But again, we've seen moments like this before where healthcare was in the balance. And the American public, speaking out, got people like John McCain and a couple of my other colleagues to change their vote and do the right thing. So we'll see how this plays out.
So you're appealing to morality, but tactically speaking, is there anything Democrats can do? I mean, you do have this government funding deadline coming up. Can you use that leverage?
Yeah, again, I think that there will be a lot that will play out over the coming days. But it is clearly two things are of great import. One is to appeal, a moral appeal to people who clearly stated what they would do under these circumstances. For them to go against their word is pretty significant in the public space in terms of their own honor and legitimacy. So we'll see how that plays out. And in addition to that, election has already begun. If there's any more convincing that the public needs about what's at stake, we see some of the most fundamental ideals of our nation that have been settled in many ways. The right for a woman to control her body, the basic understanding of civil rights law, all of that now is in the balance. And I think that this should motivate people significantly to speak up, let their voices be heard, and be involved in this process.
Back in 2016, when Merrick Garland was nominated by President Obama, a Democratic president, when Democrats were in the minority, you said the Senate has no excuse to ignore, blockade, or stonewall consideration of this nominee. Why a different standard now?
Well, first of all, 269 days before an election, I felt very clearly that President Obama should have been able to name a nominee, and we should have taken it up in the Senate, even have people meet with that nominee. And it is unfortunate that that did not happen. I think that that greatly undermined really a sense of what was right. Now voting has already started, and we had literally my colleagues speaking to what the rules should be, what the guiding principles they were operating on. And so for them to so severely violate their own words, I think does a tremendous amount of damage to the institution of the Senate, as well as to the legitimacy of the court. And we've got to start stepping back and having our larger view of history. It's not just the hotly contested issues of civil rights and women's rights and LGBTQ rights, all that's really in the balance here, but also the long-term strength of our democracy and the institutions that are so critical to our success as a nation. This is one of those moments where I wish we would step back and take a beat and understand what we're doing and the consequences and how they could radiate throughout time.
So what I hear you saying is what's different is that voting's already underway. With that in mind, you are a Biden surrogate. Joe Biden has repeatedly said he intends to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. If you're asking people to come out and vote on their considerations and concern about the Supreme Court, wouldn't it help if he released his nominees? Is that something you think he should do?
Again, I think that what Donald Trump started as an appeal to a far-right base, really a list from the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, that really broke with tradition. I think the president needs to evaluate it when he is the president and make his decision. And what Vice President Biden decides to do now, to me, is secondary to the urgency of this election. and all of those who value their health care and understand that these are issues that will be played out by the Supreme Court and the Senate, who issues from climate change to voting rights, all of this is on the ballot. That should be the motivating factor, not necessarily what names that Vice President Biden may or may not decide to do. What's important right now is the urgency of this election to a lot of the fundamental issues that affect our daily lives.
Yeah, I admire your focus for keeping going despite that horn there in the background in Newark. Senator, the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, has said nothing's off the table if Republicans go through with this. He's talking about what happens next year. The progressives within your party, some of them are pushing to pack the court, to add more justices to the Supreme Court. Do you support expanding it?
Look, there's a double presumption in there that I just do not want people to lose focus on. Number one, we can still appeal, like
openly
we did in
called for by some within your party.
I understand that, but let me tell you what this United States senator is openly calling for. Number one, letting your voices be heard now to appeal to the decency and honor of people who spoke what this process should be. And number two is this election. Unless we win the Senate back, unless we win the White House, all these questions are just hypothetical and moot. We need to focus on what is at hand. We are already begun voting in a number of United States. Early ballots are going out across this country. We need to win this election. Everything is on the line, and that should be, in my opinion, the focus right now.
All right. Senator Booker, thank you very much for your time and your reflections this morning. We will be right back. We're facing new grim milestones in the COVID-19 pandemic. In the U.S., there have been 6.8 million cases, and we are about to reach 200,000 deaths. Worldwide, cases stand at just short of 31 million, and the number of deaths is approaching 1 million. CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassmann is in Atlanta.
Can you believe after 6 months, Mother, that we are sitting here together?
Keep your distance. It's the new American way.
Howdy, folks. This is Big Tex.
And the Texas State Fair. We're wary, despite months of rosy reassurances.
One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear. It is going to disappear.
But in America's COVID chronicle, family sorrows are not going away.
Donald Trump insists that he wouldn't have done anything different.
You can track COVID's impact on the presidential race. Take Florida and Texas, big players on the electoral map that Mr. Trump won in 2016, run by Republican governors, and now former COVID hotspots doing better with the virus. According to our battleground tracker, so is President Trump.
The number of active cases of COVID in the state of Texas has been cut more than half since July.
Just like former Vice President Biden's lead in Florida. He's up 2 points today. In July, he was up 6. During the same time frame in Texas, President Trump's lead over Mr. Biden grew from 1 point to 2. As goes the virus, so it seems, goes the race.
Yeah, it looks like it's missing.
But the clock's running out on corona politics. Early voters have started heading to the polls or have already voted by mail. In all, 7 states have begun accepting in-person voting. 2 more will follow suit in the next week. And 23 states have started accepting mail-in ballots. Millions of polarized Americans agree. Why wait?
Without the long lines, without the long wait, and plus you can already rest assured that your vote is already in.
In many states, voters who want an early ballot have to give a good reason. In a handful of states, listing the pandemic is not considered a valid reason. Big surprise, the issue is now in the courts. COVID America is a tough place to find consensus. Margaret?
Mark, thanks. For a look at the COVID-19 situation around the world, we want to go to CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer in London.
Good morning. The U.S. has the largest number of coronavirus deaths worldwide, about 20% of the total. And then comes India with another 10%, or just under 100,000. And the bad news is the infection rate in India is skyrocketing, powered by a lethal combination of overcrowding and poverty. While India struggles with its first wave, Israel confronted its second with another national lockdown. Facing a serious surge, police set up roadblocks on the eve of the Jewish New Year to enforce travel restrictions, and normally crowded beaches are deserted. In Europe, relaxed COVID rules over the summer have sent infections rocketing up again. This week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson set new limits on social gatherings in the UK.
6 indoors maximum, 6 outdoors maximum.
In Spain, the situation is critical. From under 300 new cases a day in June, the number had soared yesterday to more than 10,000 and counting. COVID is surging in France too, but not in the Tour de France. Incredibly, in 3 weeks of scenes like this, not a single rider has tested positive for COVID. And today, the youngest rider in more than a century, 21-year-old Slovenian Tadej Pogačar, is set to win the race. Finally, in Taiwan, a radical, you might say desperate solution to cabin fever. A group of young would-be tourists boarded a charter flight to a Korean resort area, admired it out the window, and then headed home. Here in the UK, though, the infection rate is rising. The death rate so far has remained low, although in an ominous sign, Margaret, one of those huge COVID emergency hospitals that had been mothballed this summer has just reopened.
Elizabeth Palmer, thank you. We want to turn now, for perspective, to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning.
Good morning.
President Trump said at his rally last night that the country's rounding the turn on COVID-19, even without a vaccine. Is that true?
Well, I think we have at least one more cycle with this virus heading into the fall and winter. If you look at what's happening around the country right now, there's an unmistakable spike in new infections, and you're also seeing declines in hospitalizations that we were achieving starting to level off. I would expect them to start going up again as well. There's about 15 states where the positivity rate is 10% or higher, which is deeply concerning. There's about 30 states where the RT, the rate of transfer, is above 1, meaning they have an expanding epidemic. So right now we're seeing a resurgence of infection. Now, whether or not that's a post-Labor Day bump and will start to level off, or this is the beginning of a resurgence heading into the fall and the winter, it's unclear. But I'm deeply concerned that as we head into the fall and the winter, this is the season when a respiratory pathogen like coronavirus wants to spread. And so there's a lot of risk heading into this season.
Is there any similarity in terms of the concentrations you're talking about? Is it still the Midwest that has you most concerned?
Well, right now we're seeing infections go up around the country. The Northeast still is holding on to the gains that it achieved in driving down infections, but we're seeing infections starting to rise in the South as well. And you're definitely seeing a concentration of new infections in the Midwest. So that's driving a lot of the growth in infections, but it's getting more distributed around the country. And the concern is that as we get a little bit more complacent, because we are exhausted as a population from what we've been going through, we head back to school and college, people try to go back to work against the backdrop of the fall and the winter when people are heading indoors because the weather's cooling. That's a real setup for risk. And there hasn't been enough people exposed to this virus at this point across the country that we have enough background immunity that's going to really stop the rate of transfer. I mean, it may slow it in certain parts of the country where it's been epidemic, like Miami or Houston or New York, but most parts of the country are still vulnerable. And in fact, when you look at what's happening in Arizona right now, you're starting to see cases go back up even there, and that place was very hard hit. And so it's an indication that there's a lot of virus left to go in this country.
President Trump said this week that you could have enough of a supply of a vaccine by April. He had tussled with the CDC director publicly when the CDC director said we would have to wait until perhaps the third quarter of 2021 before getting a vaccine available to the American public. Who is right?
Well, I'm on the board of Pfizer, which is one of the companies that has a vaccine in advanced development, so I have some insight into this from that, although everything I know is in the public domain at this point. I think that it's possible that you'll have enough doses available by April, May, but I do not believe that a vaccine will be licensed for general use by the population until, in an optimistic scenario, really the second quarter, probably the end of the second quarter in 2021. and perhaps a little later than that. I mean, the reality is that as we come out of the winter and head into the spring, hopefully this virus will start to dissipate in the summer. So what you really want is a vaccine available for mass inoculation before you head into the fall of 2021. So hopefully in a good scenario, whether you have the vaccine available in June or you have it available in August, isn't going to make that much of a difference because the virus won't be transferring as readily by then. But I do not believe that we'll have a vaccine available for general inoculation until probably the end of the second quarter of 2021 and maybe into the third quarter. Now, that said, I do think we can have a vaccine available sooner than that under an emergency use authorization for select groups who are at particularly high risk of bad outcomes from the virus. But that's going to be very select groups on a very limited basis.
You've said time and again that at the FDA, the agency you used to run, you trust the scientists will put science first in their priority when it comes to okaying the safety of a vaccine. Is there any scenario where the president could legally override the FDA and greenlight a vaccine?
I don't see it, and I don't see a scenario where this can happen and people don't see it, where it's not readily apparent. This isn't like posting new guidelines on CDC's website in the middle of the night. In order to issue an authorization, an emergency use authorization or an approval, the only people capable of actually drafting that package are the people at FDA, and they're not going to be forced to do it unless they scientifically believe in it. I know the folks who are involved in this process, the career professionals who are engaged in this process, and they're not going to be easily cowed. And remember, on the other side of this, you also need a manufacturer that's willing to commercialize a vaccine based on that authorization or approval. The vaccine doesn't just ship into the supply chain, and I do not believe any manufacturer is going to commercialize a vaccine based on an authorization or approval that doesn't have the consent and the agreement and the involvement of the career professionals inside the FDA. I just don't see that happening. So this isn't something that I think is easily subject to outside influences. The process was designed that way. I mean, Congress set the process up this way because they wanted an objective, impervious process.
I hear what you're saying. But I want to ask you about an article in the New York Times that, again, adds yet another question about the independence of our health agencies. The Times is reporting that the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, signed an order that bars other agencies, including the FDA, from signing new rules affecting products, including vaccines. The Times reports that when you were running the FDA, you actually tried to stop this kind of power grab. It happened. What's the political implication? What's the reality now?
Well, I don't think this is unfortunate because I think it sends exactly the wrong message. At a time that we want to reaffirm the independence of these agencies, this does create an implication or at least a specter that the independence of that agency is being eroded or influenced. That's not the practical effect right now in terms of what this is going to do to the COVID response, but at a time we should be focused on that COVID response, this is a major distraction. Now, what this move does is basically say that only the secretary can codify rules. And if he's asserting that right now, that could call into question all the rules that were implemented where lower level people were delegated the authority to sign those rules. And in fact, on my second to last day on the job, I recodified the tobacco deeming regulation because I was concerned that they could take this kind of a step and then use it as a basis to call into legitimacy the codification of that deeming rule. So I recodified it myself, even though it was put in place under the Obama administration. So I think that this is the wrong move at the wrong time, at a time that they should be reaffirming the independence and the integrity of these agencies. To do this now just makes no sense.
And does it just mean, what, more potential lawsuits? What's the implication of it?
Yeah, it could mean, I think what's going to happen now is conservative groups, and there's actually litigation this week that's being heard around the tobacco deeming rule, where a group is alleging that that rule was inappropriately implemented because the authority to sign that rule was delegated to a lower-level career official inside the agency. And so this has been something that conservative groups, frankly, have been after for a while. They want to elevate the authority to implement regulations. And I think if the basis for why the secretary did this is because he thinks the past delegations were inappropriate, that potentially could create another avenue to have legal challenges. So it's a distraction to FDA at the time that they should be focused on the COVID response. The timing of this makes no sense. I don't believe in the underlying basis of what they did, and I did oppose it when I was at the agency, but the timing of this is just really poor right now because it's going to distract the agency, and frankly, it creates headlines that could leave the perception that the agency is being bullied.
Thank you very much for putting that in perspective and for sharing your insight, Dr. Gottlieb. We're going to have to leave it there, and we'll be back in a moment. Finally, today, a look back at the life and the legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a civil rights icon who devoted her career to fighting for gender equality.
It's heartbreaking to lose such a strong female individual who really has fought for the rights of all people.
At nearly every stage, Ginsburg faced discrimination.
Not a law firm in the entire city of New York bid for my employment as a lawyer when I earned my degree.
Despite graduating top of her Columbia law class, as Ginsburg later explained, the fact that she was a mother was seen as a grave impediment. She began studying discrimination, volunteered in the 1970s at the ACLU, and began breaking legal barriers. As a litigator, she helped persuade the Supreme Court to rule for the first time that gender-based discrimination violates the Constitution. And she illustrated that it cuts both ways by selecting cases in which the laws disadvantaged men. In 1993, she was confirmed to the court herself and became notorious for her stinging dissents, often in support of feminist causes, like this one in the 2007 Lilly Ledbetter versus Goodyear case.
The court does not comprehend or is indifferent to the insidious way in which women can be victims of pay discrimination.
Her opinion led Congress to change the law, easing time restrictions on filing discrimination suits. During her 27 years as a justice, she became a celebrity.
They call her the notorious RBG. I'm cramping and I'm working out with an 85-year-old woman.
But it was her advocacy that cemented her iconic status.
People ask me, when would you be satisfied with the number of women on the court? When there are 9.
Her liberal beliefs made her friendship with conservative Justice Antonin Scalia rare in a partisan Washington.
And I was listening to him and disagreeing with a good part of what he said, but thought he said it in an absolutely captivating way.
I think we should leave it at that brief point.
We agree on a whole lot of stuff. We do. Ruth is really bad only on the knee-jerk stuff. She is.
Across the political spectrum, her legacy of striving for the ideal of equality is being celebrated.
I see the Constitution as striving for a more perfect union.
We'll be right back. Casting a ballot this year could be very different than what we're used to. In order to find out how and where you can vote in your state, go to cbsnews.com/vote. It's a digital guide, states and dates. You can also download the free CBS News app on your phone or connected TV for more election news and analysis. That's it for us today. We will see you next week. I'm Margaret Brennan.